Power can make or break a person. But when arrogance blinds a man to the truth, justice has a way of catching up. Imagine a CEO so powerful, so untouchable, that no one dared to challenge him. Employees cowered in fear, careers were destroyed on his whim, and anyone who questioned his rule found themselves cast aside. Now imagine that same CEO, a man who ruled his corporate empire with an iron fist, unknowingly humiliating the one person he should have feared the most, his new boss. This is not just a story of arrogance, it is a story of justice, of standing up to oppression, and of how a single moment can change everything. If you believe in fairness, accountability, and the power of truth, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories. Chapter 1. A man who thought he was untouchable. In the heart of New York's corporate jungle stood Titan Holdings, a billion-dollar financial empire run by Jonathan Crane, a CEO infamous for his ruthless leadership. He was not just a businessman. He was a dictator in a suit. Employees feared him, and executives bent to his will. Jonathan didn't care about people, only control. His word was law, and he enjoyed watching subordinates squirm under his power. He believed in intimidation, in breaking people's spirits until they were nothing more than pawns on his chessboard. That's why, when a seemingly ordinary woman named Elena Carter walked into the company, he didn't bother learning her name. She wasn't important, just another nobody in his empire. That was his first mistake. Chapter 2. The moment everything changed. Elena arrived at Titan Holdings in a simple black dress, her auburn hair neatly tied back. She carried herself with quiet confidence, but in a place like Titan Holdings, that meant nothing. As she entered the luxurious glass lobby, she watched employees rush around, heads down, voices hushed. The energy was oppressive. Fear hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Approaching the front desk, she asked, "Excuse me, I need to speak with someone about an internal review." The receptionist glanced at her, then at the towering figure who had just entered, the one man who thrived on humiliating others. Jonathan Crane. Jonathan had just returned from a board meeting, his expensive watch gleaming under the LED lights. He looked at Elena, unimpressed, before sneering. "And who are you supposed to be?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Elena met his gaze, unfazed. "I need to speak with someone regarding a company-wide review." Jonathan scoffed, letting out a cruel laugh. "Oh, let me guess. You're another one of those HR idiots here to fix the culture?" His words carried mockery, and his executives standing nearby chuckled along, eager to please their tyrant leader. Elena simply held her ground. "I believe every employee has the right to a safe and respectful workplace." That was the moment Jonathan Crane decided he didn't like her. Chapter 3. Humiliation in front of everyone. He stepped closer, looming over Elena like a predator sizing up his prey. Then, with a twisted smirk, he picked up his steaming cup of coffee. "Let me teach you something about respect," he murmured. And before anyone could react, he threw the entire cup of hot coffee in Elena's face. The scalding liquid splashed onto her skin, her dress, her hair. Gasps filled the lobby. A moment of silence. Then a sharp inhale. Elena's skin burned, but she did not scream. She did not flinch. She just stood there, her expression blank, coffee dripping from her chin. Jonathan laughed, satisfied with his display of dominance. Consider that a lesson in knowing your place. The employees? They turned away. They always turned away. No one challenged Jonathan Crane and survived. But today would be different. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. Elena calmly wiped her face with the back of her hand. Then she looked up and said the words that would haunt Jonathan Crane forever. "Thank you for showing me exactly how things work around here, Mr. Crane. Now allow me to introduce myself." She reached into her black leather bag, pulled out a file, and slid it onto the receptionist's desk. The employees froze. The executive stiffened. Jonathan Crane's smirk wavered. Elena turned to face the entire lobby. "My name is Elena Carter. As of this morning, I am the new chairwoman of Titan Holdings." Silence. Total. Absolute. Silence. The color drained from Jonathan's face. The mockery vanished. For the first time in years, Jonathan Crane had no words. Chapter 5. The Fall of a Tyrant. The days that followed were chaos. The board of directors held an emergency meeting. Without Jonathan, his power crumbled overnight. Reports surfaced of years of employee abuse, of corruption, of intimidation tactics. Elena uncovered every lie, every deception, every scandal. The same employees who had once feared him now stepped forward, ready to testify. When Jonathan Crane walked into the building the next morning, his access card was denied. Security escorted him out of the building he once ruled. The press had a field day. Titan Holdings CEO fired after shocking allegations. Revenge served. Chairwoman exposes corporate tyrant. Elena Carter didn't just remove Jonathan. She destroyed him. Chapter 6. A New Era. Titan. Holdings changed forever. Elena implemented new policies. Employees no longer worked in fear. Promotions were given based on merit, not connections. One afternoon, a junior employee, James Parker, nervously knocked on Elena's office door. "Come in," she said. James hesitated. Then, softly, he said, "Thank you." "For what?" Elena asked. James swallowed hard. "For standing up to him. For showing us that people like him don't always win." Elena smiled. "Because in the end, justice always wins." The lesson of this story. Jonathan Crane thought he was invincible. He believed power would always protect him, but power is only as strong as the people who allow it to go unchecked. No one is untouchable. So let's ask ourselves, what would you do if you saw injustice? Would you stand up or look away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you believe in accountability. Subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the truth. Share this story and help spread awareness, because justice isn't something we wait for, it's something we fight for. The shadows of silence. When fear destroys integrity. What would you do if you witnessed something terrible, but speaking up could cost you everything? Injustice doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it seeps in quietly, like a poison, infecting everyone it touches. You see it happening. You feel it in the air. But do you dare to speak? Today's story is not just about power and corruption. It's about the people who watch, the people who remain silent, and the consequences of turning a blind eye. If you believe that silence in the face of injustice is just as dangerous as the act itself, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories that reveal the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Unspoken Truths of Titan Holdings. The office of Titan Holdings was notorious. From the outside, it was a gleaming tower of success, a corporate giant built on wealth and power. But inside, behind the glass walls and polished floors, it was a battlefield. No one dared to cross Jonathan Crane, the company's ruthless CEO. He was the kind of man who thrived on control, who fed off fear. Employees whispered about him in hushed tones, their eyes darting over their shoulders. Everyone knew what happened to those who spoke out. First, you'd get overlooked for promotions. Then, small mistakes would suddenly become major violations. Then, your name would disappear from the system. One moment, you were an employee. The next, you were nobody. That's why, when Elena Carter arrived at Titan Holdings, everyone held their breath. She didn't look scared. She didn't lower her gaze like the rest. And that alone made her a target. Chapter 2. A Lesson in Fear. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the air in the office was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Elena had been called into Jonathan Crane's office. No one spoke as she walked through the hall. The silence was suffocating. Everyone knew what this meant. She was about to be broken. Inside, Jonathan sat behind his massive desk, watching her with amusement. "You've been quite vocal lately," he said, leaning back in his chair. Elena didn't flinch. "I believe employees should be treated with respect." Jonathan smirked. "And I believe in keeping order." Then, in one fluid motion, he reached for the steaming coffee on his desk, and he threw it. The burning liquid splashed across her blouse, soaking into the fabric, scorching her skin. A sharp gasp filled the air, but it wasn't Elena's. It was from Chris Foster, a junior analyst standing by the door. For a brief second, their eyes met. Chris's face was pale, his hands clenched at his sides. And then, he looked away, just like everyone else. Jonathan smiled, pleased with himself. "Consider that a lesson," he said coolly. Elena wiped the coffee from her skin. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence wasn't defeat. It was a warning. And Jonathan Crane had no idea what he had just done. Chapter 3. The Price of Silence. Chris Foster sat at his desk, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had seen it all. The coffee, the humiliation, the smirk on Crane's face. And he had done nothing. He was a coward. As the hours passed, he tried to push the image out of his mind. He wasn't the only one who stayed silent. Everyone else had looked away too. But that night, as he lay in bed, the guilt clawed at him. What if it had been me? What if Jonathan Crane had decided to make an example of him instead of Elena? And then came the worst question of all. What if Elena had a plan? What if she wasn't afraid? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had to know. Chapter 4. The Plan Unfolds. The next morning, Titan Holdings was buzzing with whispers. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. Chris watched as Elena walked through the office with calm precision, a leather case tucked under her arm. She wasn't just a woman recovering from humiliation. She was a woman preparing for war. Then, just before lunch, an email hit every inbox. Subject: Emergency Board Meeting. Attendance mandatory. Chris froze. A few desks away, Jonathan Crane stood motionless, his expression dark. "Who called the meeting?" he asked. No one answered. But Chris saw it then. The slight tremor in Crane's hand. For the first time, Titan Holdings' king was afraid. Chapter 5. Judgment Day. The boardroom was filled with executives, their faces tense with anticipation. Elena stood at the head of the room, her eyes scanning the room with icy precision. She placed her case on the table and slowly unzipped it. Chris's breath caught. Inside were files, documents, evidence. And at the very top, a signed statement of employee abuse, sealed with an official complaint. Jonathan paled. Elena lifted her chin. I have spent the last 2 months gathering testimonies, financial records, internal emails. She turned her gaze directly to Jonathan. And I know everything. A ripple of shock swept across the room. But Elena wasn't done. She took out a USB drive and plugged it into the presentation screen. And then, video footage played. Surveillance footage. The moment Jonathan Crane threw the coffee. The room fell into silence. Chris felt his stomach drop. Jonathan Crane's reign of terror was over. Chapter 6. A New Beginning. The next morning, Titan Holdings felt different. The fear was gone. Jonathan Crane had been escorted out of the building by security. His power dismantled. His reputation in ruins. Elena was not just a survivor. She was the new leader. And Chris? For the first time in his career, he held his head high. Because he had spoken up. Because he had chosen integrity over fear. Because in the end, justice isn't about power. It's about standing up, even when your voice shakes. What would you do? Chris Foster almost made the worst mistake of his life. He almost let fear win. But he didn't. Now I ask you, what would you do if you saw injustice? Would you stay silent, or would you speak? Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right. Comment your thoughts below. What would you have done in Chris's place? Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth and inspire justice, because at the end of the day, silence is a choice, and choosing to speak? That's what changes everything. The mask of power. When a nobody becomes the boss. What if the person you mistreated turned out to be the one who could destroy you? Power is a dangerous thing. Some wield it with wisdom. Others use it to oppress. And some are so drunk on control, they never see the end coming. Until it's too late. Today's story is about arrogance, deception, and justice. It's about a man who ruled his world with fear, and the one woman who walked in unnoticed and took it all away. If you believe that no one should be above justice, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Woman No One Noticed. The towering glass skyscraper of Titan Holdings stood as a symbol of wealth, power, and fear. Employees moved through the grand lobby like ghosts, silent, cautious, careful not to be noticed. In this kingdom of oppression, Jonathan Crane was king. For 15 years, he had ruled with absolute authority, crushing anyone who stood against him. He thrived on intimidation, turning the workplace into a battlefield where he was the only victor. So, when a quiet, unremarkable woman named Elena Carter walked into the building one Monday morning, no one paid attention. Not the receptionist, not the executives, and certainly not Jonathan Crane. That was his first mistake. Chapter 2. A King Without a Clue. Elena walked through the office, her dark blazer neat, her auburn hair tied back in a simple ponytail. She wasn't loud. She wasn't attention-seeking. She was just another nobody. She watched. She listened. She saw everything. The fear in the employees' eyes when they passed Crane's office, the way people held their breath when he walked by, the whispers about the ones who had been fired for daring to question him. And then, she met him. Jonathan Crane, seated at his massive mahogany desk, looked at her with thinly veiled disinterest. "And who the hell are you?" he asked, barely glancing up. Elena smiled. "Just someone here to learn," she said. He smirked. "Then you'd better learn fast. I don't have time for dead weight in my company." The arrogance dripped from his words. Elena simply nodded. She wasn't offended. She wasn't angry. She was waiting, and soon Jonathan Crane would regret every word. Chapter 3. The Taste of Fear. Days passed. Elena became a shadow, slipping unnoticed into meetings, watching, listening, waiting. She saw how he destroyed people, how he would call an employee into his office, rip them apart with a cold, unforgiving smile, and send them out ruined. She saw the fear that kept everyone silent. And then came the moment she had been waiting for. Jonathan Crane snapped. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. A junior analyst, Chris Foster, had made a simple mistake, a miscalculation on a financial report. Nothing major, easily fixable. But Jonathan? Jonathan was waiting for someone to break. The boardroom doors slammed open, and before Chris could react, a hot cup of coffee was thrown at him. Chris gasped, the burning liquid soaking his shirt, scalding his skin. The room fell into dead silence. No one moved. No one spoke. No one dared. And that was when Jonathan Crane laughed. "Pathetic," he sneered. "If you can't handle this, get out of my building." Chris stood frozen, humiliated, hurting, broken. But it wasn't Chris's reaction that mattered. It was Elena's. Because in that moment, she made her decision. It was time. Chapter 4. The Unveiling of a Queen. The next morning, an email hit every inbox. Subject: Emergency Board meeting. Attendance mandatory. The tension in the office was tangible. People whispered. Something was coming. And Jonathan Crane? He laughed. "Some idiot probably got their feelings hurt," he said, leaning back in his chair. He walked into the boardroom with his usual confidence, his smirk firmly in place. And then he saw her, Elena Carter, standing at the head of the table. She wasn't wearing her simple office attire anymore. She was in a power suit. She looked different. She looked dangerous. Jonathan frowned. "Why the hell are you sitting at the board's table?" Elena placed her hands on the cold glass surface, her gaze unwavering. Then she spoke 7 words that made the blood drain from Jonathan's face. "I am the new CEO of Titan Holdings." The silence that followed was deafening. Jonathan's smirk disappeared. His world tilted. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "This is a joke, right?" Elena slid a signed contract across the table. Jonathan grabbed it, read it, and froze. Because it wasn't just a promotion letter. It was a corporate transfer of power. Signed, sealed, irrevocable. Jonathan's reign was over. Chapter 5. The king falls. Elena leaned back, her expression cold and composed. "You thought I was nothing," she said. "You thought you could humiliate me." Jonathan's fists clenched. This is impossible." She tilted her head. "Is it?" Then she reached into her folder and pulled out the final blow, a USB drive. She plugged it into the screen. And then, security footage played. The entire board watched as Jonathan Crane threw coffee on Chris Foster, as he laughed while an employee burned, as he reveled in their pain. The board members stiffened. Elena turned to them. "This is the man you allowed to run this company. But his reign ends today." Jonathan's world collapsed. The board voted unanimously. Jonathan was stripped of his position. Security escorted him out. And Elena? She took his place. Chapter 6. A New Dawn Titan. Holdings changed overnight. Elena removed the culture of fear. She implemented policies that protected employees. Chris Foster? He was promoted. And Jonathan Crane? He was erased from the company's history. His legacy was gone. And in the end, justice was served. What would you have done? Jonathan Crane thought power made him untouchable. But in the end, his arrogance destroyed him. Now let's ask you, what would you do if you had to work under someone like Crane? Would you stay silent or fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you believe in justice. Subscribe for more gripping stories that reveal the truth. Share this video to spread the message because no one is above justice. Because in the end, the ones you ignore today may be the ones who hold your future in their hands. The fall of a tyrant. When power becomes a cage. What happens when the man who once ruled with an iron fist realizes he's no longer in control? Power is a double-edged sword. It can build empires, but it can also lead to self-destruction. Jonathan Crane thought he was unstoppable. He ruled his company with fear, using his authority to humiliate, intimidate, and manipulate everyone beneath him. But he never expected the one person he underestimated the most to be the very force that would bring him down. Today's story is about arrogance, power, and justice. It's about how a man who thought he had everything lost it all in the blink of an eye. If you believe in justice, fairness, and standing up to those who abuse power, then hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Weight of Power. The air inside Titan Holdings was thick with fear. For years, Jonathan Crane had ruled mercilessly, crushing anyone who dared oppose him. His office wasn't just a room. It was a throne. Employees walked silently, heads down, never meeting his gaze. They obeyed without question, not out of respect, but out of fear of what would happen if they didn't. No one dared challenge him. No one except one woman, Elena Carter, and she was about to change everything. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. Jonathan Crane loved watching people squirm. He thrived on control. But that Wednesday afternoon was different. He had been waiting for an opportunity to remind the employees who was in charge. Then it happened. A junior analyst, Chris Foster, made a simple mistake. A miscalculation in a financial report. Jonathan seized the moment. "Foster!" he called out, his voice echoing through the boardroom. Chris turned pale. He knew what was coming. The room fell silent. Jonathan walked up to him, a hot cup of coffee in hand. Then, with a twisted smirk, he threw the entire cup at Chris. The scalding liquid splashed across his chest, burning his skin. A gasp rippled through the boardroom. But no one moved. No one spoke. Jonathan smiled. He had won. Or so he thought. Because at that moment, Elena Carter stood up. And everything changed. Chapter 3. The Woman Who Wouldn't Break. Jonathan turned to Elena, his smirk widening. "And what do you think you're doing?" he asked. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't cower. She simply said, "Enough!" Jonathan's amusement faded. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone sharp. Elena stepped forward, placing herself between him and Chris. "You've gone too far." Jonathan laughed. "Too far," he mocked. "This is my company, and I'll do whatever I damn well please." Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Not anymore." For the first time, Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something different about her. something dangerous. Chapter 4. The truth unfolds. The next morning, an email hit every inbox. Subject: emergency board meeting. Attendance mandatory. Jonathan Crane's stomach dropped. He had not called for a meeting. Then who had? When he entered the boardroom, his heart stopped. Elena was standing at the head of the table. She wasn't in her usual simple office attire. She was in a power suit. Her hair was neatly pulled back. She looked like someone in charge. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "What the hell is this?" he snapped. Elena placed her hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. "This is the end of your reign." Jonathan let out a cold laugh. "Excuse me." She reached into her black leather folder and slid a document across the table. Jonathan grabbed it, his fingers clenching as he read. His face paled. Because it wasn't just a report. It was a signed transfer of power. Jonathan Crane was no longer CEO. Chapter 5. The King's Fall. Jonathan staggered back. His breath hitched. No, this isn't possible," he muttered. Elena's expression remained calm. "It's over, Jonathan," she said. "I've spent the last few months gathering evidence. The board has voted." He whipped around, searching for support. The executives? They wouldn't even look at him. He turned back to Elena, his voice cold, desperate. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything I built?" Elena met his gaze without hesitation. "You destroyed yourself," she said. Then she pulled out one final weapon. A USB drive. Jonathan froze. She plugged it into the screen. And then, footage played. Security footage. It showed Jonathan throwing coffee on Chris. Laughing. Mocking. Threatening. The entire board witnessed the truth. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan Crane felt powerless. Chapter 6. The New Beginning. Security escorted Jonathan out. The employees? They watched in silence. And then, one by one, they started to clap. Elena didn't smile. She wasn't here to celebrate a man's downfall. She was here to fix what he broke. Chris Foster was given a promotion. Company policies were rewritten. Titan Holdings was no longer a kingdom of fear. It was a company of integrity. And Elena Carter? She wasn't just the new CEO. She was the leader they had been waiting for. What would you do? Jonathan Crane thought fear made him untouchable. But in the end, justice prevailed. Now, let's ask you, what would you do if you had to work under someone like Crane? Would you stay silent or fight back? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video to show support for Elena's fight against injustice. Subscribe for more gripping stories about truth, power, and justice. Share this video to spread the message, because no one is above justice. Because in the end, the ones you ignore today may be the ones who hold your future in their hands. The moment of truth. When power shifts hands. What happens when the person you least expect turns out to be the one with the most power? Power is a strange thing. It can make some invincible while making others invisible. For years, Jonathan Crane ruled his company with fear, crushing anyone who dared question him. Employees walked on eggshells, terrified of his wrath. But what happens when the quietest person in the room is actually the most powerful? What happens when the one person he humiliated the most turns out to be his new boss? This is a story about arrogance, justice, and the moment a tyrant realized he was powerless. If you believe in fairness, justice, and standing up against bullies, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Invisible Woman. In the cold, towering skyscraper of Titan Holdings, power belonged to one man, Jonathan Crane. His word was law. His presence was intimidating. His reputation was legendary, for all the wrong reasons. People didn't just work for him, they feared him. He had built his empire not with intelligence, but with ruthless domination. And because of that, he never noticed Elena Carter. She was just a shadow in the office, a woman no one paid attention to, a woman who knew everything, and a woman who was waiting for her moment. Chapter 2. The Mistake That Changed Everything. Jonathan Crane was having a bad day. His meeting had gone wrong. His board was questioning his leadership, and the last thing he needed was an employee mistake. But there it was, a small error in a financial report, easily fixable. But Jonathan didn't believe in small mistakes. He believed in making examples out of people. So, in front of everyone, he called Chris Foster, a junior analyst, to the center of the room, and with a cold, merciless smirk, he threw a cup of hot coffee at him. Chris gasped, stumbling back, the burning liquid soaking his shirt. The room fell silent. Everyone stared, but no one moved. No one dared to interfere. Except one person. Elena Carter stood up. And in that moment, everything changed. Chapter 3. The Shift in Power. Jonathan Crane turned to her, amused. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked. Elena's hands were steady. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. "I think you just made your last mistake." Jonathan laughed, the kind of mocking laugh that sent shivers down people's spines. "You think you can challenge me?" he scoffed. "You're nothing." Elena tilted her head. "Am I?" Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Jonathan's smirk wavered. She slid it across the table. "Read it," she said. The room held its breath as Jonathan grabbed the folder and opened it. His face paled. Because it wasn't just a report, it was a contract, a legal document, signed, sealed, irrevocable, and at the top, the words that made his entire world collapse. Elena Carter, CEO, Titan Holdings. Chapter 4. The Fall of a Tyrant. The room was silent. Jonathan Crane's hands shook as he stared at the paper. This isn't possible," he muttered. Elena leaned forward, her voice calm, but final. "This company is under new leadership." Jonathan's breath quickened. He looked around the room, searching for support. The executives? They wouldn't even meet his eyes. The employees? They were watching. Waiting. Hopeful. Jonathan shook his head. "No," he whispered. "This is my company." Elena lifted a USB drive. "Not anymore." She plugged it into the presentation screen. And then, footage played. Security footage. Jonathan's own cruelty, on display for everyone to see. Him throwing coffee on employees. Him mocking them. Threatening them. Destroying them. The truth, undeniable. Jonathan took a step back. His entire kingdom was crumbling. Chapter 5. Justice served. Security walked in. The guards who once followed his orders now stood ready to escort him out. Jonathan whipped around to Elena, his voice shaking. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think this company will survive without me?" Elena simply met his gaze. "It will. because I'll make sure of it." Jonathan's face twisted in rage, but rage couldn't save him now. Security grabbed his arms. He struggled, but it was pointless. The man who once owned everything now had nothing. And as he was dragged through the lobby, the employees began to clap. It started softly, then grew louder, until the entire building erupted in applause. Jonathan was gone. For good. Chapter 6. The Rebirth of Titan Holdings. The next morning, Titan Holdings felt different. The fear was gone. The shadows had lifted. And Elena Carter? She wasn't just a survivor. She was a leader. Her first act as CEO? Chris Foster. Promoted. Company policies. Rewritten. A toxic legacy. Erased. For the first time in years, employees walked through the doors without fear. And in the break room, where whispers of terror once spread, people laughed because they were free. Elena Carter had done what no one else could. She had destroyed a tyrant, and in doing so, she had rebuilt hope. What would you have done? Jonathan Crane thought power made him invincible. But in the end, justice prevailed. Now, let's ask you, would you have had the courage to stand up to someone like Crane? Drop your thoughts in the comments below to support Elena's fight for justice. Like this video to show your support for standing up against workplace abuse. Subscribe for more powerful stories about truth, courage, and justice. Share this video to spread the message, because no one should suffer in silence, because in the end, justice belongs to those who fight for it. The Tyrant's Revenge. When the battle isn't over. What if taking down a tyrant was just the beginning? Some battles end when the villain is defeated. But real battles, they continue long after the dust has settled. Jonathan Crane wasn't the type to go quietly. Yes, he lost his throne. Yes, he was publicly humiliated. Yes, Elena Carter had won the war. Or so she thought, because Jonathan Crane wasn't finished yet. And his revenge was only just beginning. If you believe that justice must always prevail, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. It had been a week since Jonathan Crane was thrown out of Titan Holdings. Elena Carter had taken over as CEO, and for the first time in years, the company felt alive. The fear was gone. The shadows had lifted. And yet, something felt wrong. Elena could feel it in the air, like a storm was brewing just beneath the surface. She just didn't know where it would strike first. Then one morning, an anonymous letter arrived at her desk. It was short. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Elena's hands tightened around the paper. Because she recognized the handwriting. Jonathan Crane wasn't done. Chapter 2. The First Strike. It started slowly, a glitch in the payroll system. Employees didn't receive their paychecks. Then, critical files went missing from the company's cloud storage. Then, a scandalous news article surfaced accusing Elena of fraud. And then, the real blow came. One of Titan Holdings' biggest investors pulled out. The stock price dropped overnight. The board of directors panicked. The headlines screamed, "New CEO fails to maintain Titan Holdings stability." Elena Carter in over her head? Could Titan Holdings' former CEO make a return? Elena's chest tightened. She knew exactly what was happening. Jonathan was sabotaging her, And the worst part? He was doing it from the shadows. Chapter 3. The Return of a Tyrant. Then came the meeting that changed everything. Elena sat in the boardroom, facing a table full of nervous executives. And then he walked in. Jonathan Crane, dressed in a sharp suit, acting as if nothing had happened. Elena's stomach dropped. He shouldn't be here. But he was smiling. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice dripping with mockery, "I hear you've been having difficulties." Elena's fists clenched under the table. She forced herself to breathe. "Stay calm." "You were fired," she said coldly. "What are you doing here?" Jonathan tilted his head, his smirk growing. "Well, see, that's the thing." He turned to the board. Titan Holdings has lost millions in just a few days. Investors are leaving. The stock is tanking. His gaze flickered back to Elena. "Which means the board has a choice," he said smoothly. "Either they reinstate me, or they watch the company collapse." A chill spread through the room. Jonathan leaned forward. "What's it going to be?" Chapter 4. The Trap Closes. Elena could see it happening. The board members shifting in their seats. Some of them believed him. Some of them were already considering it. She had to act fast. "Elena," one of the board members, Mr. Holloway, spoke. "We need to think about what's best for the company." Jonathan's smirk grew. "Yes, Elena," he said. "What's best for the company?" Elena's mind raced. She could fight him head on, but that's what he wanted. No, she had to be smarter. She had to set a trap of her own. Elena folded her hands on the table, her expression cool and collected. "All right," she said. "Let's negotiate." Jonathan blinked. The board members froze. But Elena? She was calm. And that's when Jonathan should have known he had already lost. Chapter 5. The Reversal. Elena knew Jonathan was behind the sabotage, but she needed proof, and there was only one way to get it. She set the terms. "I'll step down," she said, "on one condition." Jonathan leaned in. She continued. "You get full control of Titan Holdings for 48 hours. Jonathan's eyes narrowed. She wasn't fighting him. She was handing him the company. Why? But Jonathan couldn't resist. His ego wouldn't let him. He leaned back, smirking. Done. And with that, the trap was set. Chapter 6. The Final Checkmate. Jonathan Crane returned to his office. He didn't know that Elena had already placed surveillance on every system. He didn't know that every move he made would be monitored and recorded. And in less than 12 hours, Jonathan exposed himself. Emails, transactions, secret calls. The proof was all there. Jonathan Crane had orchestrated everything. He had planted the payroll issue. He had deleted the company's critical files. He had leaked the fake fraud reports. And now, he was caught by his own arrogance. Chapter 7. The True Fall of Jonathan Crane. Elena walked back into the boardroom, holding a folder in her hands. Jonathan was already there, grinning. "Well," he said smugly, "ready to step down?" Elena placed the folder on the table. "I have something to show you first." Jonathan frowned. She clicked the remote, and the screens lit up. Emails, bank transfers, security footage. The evidence spilled into the room like a flood. The board members stared, horrified. Jonathan froze. His face drained of color. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Elena tilted her head. "Jonathan," she said softly, "you're under arrest." And at that moment, the doors burst open. Law enforcement officers stormed the room. Jonathan tried to run, tried to deny everything, tried to fight. But it was over. The guards dragged him away. And Titan Holdings? It was finally free. The final victory. With Jonathan Crane gone for good, Elena restored the company. She fixed what he broke. She rebuilt trust. And for the first time in years, Titan Holdings thrived. Because the real power, it had never belonged to Jonathan. It had always belonged to the truth. What would you have done? Jonathan Crane thought he could come back, but justice always wins. Now let's ask you, would you have been able to outsmart Jonathan? Drop a comment below to encourage Elena for her victory. Like this video if you believe justice always prevails. Subscribe for more powerful stories about truth, power, and justice. Share this video to spread the message, because no tyrant should ever rise again. Because in the end, justice belongs to those who fight for it. The war for truth. When lies become a weapon. What happens when the person you destroyed fights back harder? Power is a dangerous drug. Some people use it to lead. Others use it to control. And some, they'll do anything to keep it. Elena Carter had already taken down Jonathan Crane. She had exposed him. She had won, or so she thought. But Jonathan Crane wasn't done yet. He had one last weapon left: public opinion. And this time, he was playing dirty. If you believe that truth must always prevail over lies, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that expose corruption and injustice. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Monster in the Shadows. It had been 2 weeks since Jonathan Crane was thrown out of Titan Holdings. The company was healing. The fear had lifted. For the first time in years, people walked into work without knots in their stomachs. And Elena? She was doing everything she could to rebuild trust. But then, the first attack came. An article appeared online. Elena Carter, a fraud? The shocking truth about Titan Holdings' new CEO. Elena's blood ran cold as she read the words. The article claimed she had lied, that she had manipulated her way into power, that she had stolen company funds. And worst of all, it looked real. Every source was fabricated. Every accusation was a lie. But to the public, it was the truth. And Elena knew exactly who was behind it. Jonathan Crane. Chapter 2. The war begins. The next morning, Titan Holdings was in chaos. Employees whispered in the halls. Board members looked at Elena differently. And then came the investors. Elena, Mr. Holloway, one of Titan Holdings' biggest backers, said, his tone uneasy. We need to talk. Elena knew what was coming. We can't have a CEO surrounded by scandal, he said. The company is already unstable. We need to protect our investments. She was losing support. She had to fight back. But before she could act, another bomb dropped. An anonymous video was leaked to the press. Insider speaks out. The dark truth about Elena Carter. And then, Jonathan Crane's face appeared. He looked calm, professional, a victim. I'm not here to talk about myself, he said, his voice heavy with false regret. I just want to warn the public about a dangerous woman. He told half-truths mixed with lies. He made it look convincing. And the worst part, people believed him. Chapter 3. Trapped in a web of lies. Overnight, everything changed. Protests formed outside Titan Holdings. "Resign, Elena! Justice for Crane!" Her email was flooded with threats. Her phone rang endlessly with reporters demanding answers. And then, the board called an emergency meeting. When Elena walked into the room, the air was thick with tension. Some board members wouldn't even look at her. Jonathan's plan was working. "Miss Carter," one of them said, clearing his throat, "we need to discuss your leadership." Elena's stomach twisted. They were turning on her. Jonathan had set the fire, and now she was burning. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. Elena fought. She showed the board proof that the articles were fake. She hired analysts to trace the anonymous leaks. She stood her ground. But Jonathan was always one step ahead. Every time she countered one lie, he spread another. And then, he made his final move. A falsified financial report surfaced. Elena Carter embezzled millions! Lawsuit imminent? Jonathan Crane was right all along. The board turned against her. "Elena," one of them said coldly, "you need to step down." Her heart dropped. Jonathan had won. Or so he thought. Chapter 5. The Last Stand. Elena walked out of the boardroom, but she wasn't done. Jonathan wanted a war? Then he was going to get one. She had one last chance. She needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that Jonathan had orchestrated everything. She only had one person who could help. Chris Foster. Chapter 6. The Truth Uncovered. Chris had always been quiet, but he had seen everything. He had been in the company long enough to know where the secrets were buried. And with his help, Elena found the smoking gun. A recorded call between Jonathan Crane and a journalist. His own words caught on tape. "Jonathan, I don't care what you have to do. Destroy her. Make them doubt her. Just make sure by the time I'm done they'll beg me to come back." She had him, and now she was going to destroy him. Chapter 7. The Final Battle. The next morning, Elena held a press conference. The media swarmed. She walked onto the stage calm, steady, unshaken. She held up one simple USB drive. And she played the recording. The room fell into stunned silence. Jonathan's lies unraveled in seconds. Every headline changed. Crane exposed the real conspiracy. Jonathan Crane's revenge plot revealed. The protests stopped. The board backed down. Titan Holdings was saved. And Jonathan Crane? He was facing criminal charges. This time for good. The true victory. Elena had been tested. She had been dragged through the mud. She had been pushed to her breaking point. But in the end, she didn't just survive. She won. And Titan Holdings? It was stronger than ever. What would you have done? Jonathan Crane thought he could rewrite the truth. But in the end, justice always prevails. Now, let's ask you, would you have fought back like Elena, or would you have given up? Drop a comment below to support her victory. Like this video, if you believe truth always wins. Subscribe for more powerful stories of courage and justice. Share this video to spread the message, because lies should never win over truth. Because in the end, the truth will always rise. The price of silence. When one voice changes everything. What would you do if you discovered the truth? One that could destroy the most powerful person in the room? Some people use power for good. Others use it to silence those who know too much. Chris Foster was never a fighter. He kept his head down, did his job, and stayed out of trouble. But what if staying silent meant letting injustice win? What if the truth he uncovered could bring down the most feared man in the company? Would he speak? Or would he stay silent like everyone else? If you believe that speaking up against corruption is always the right choice, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that expose the truth. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The Coward's Dilemma. Chris Foster had worked at Titan Holdings for 3 years. In that time, he had learned one important lesson: never get involved. It didn't matter if you saw something wrong. It didn't matter if you knew people were being mistreated. Because in Titan Holdings, there were only 2 kinds of people: those who obeyed, those who disappeared. And the one person you never crossed? Jonathan Crane. The former CEO might have been fired, but his influence hadn't disappeared. People still feared him. People still whispered his name in the hallways. And Chris? He had something that could destroy him. Chapter 2. The Hidden Truth. It started with a mistake. Chris had been working late, going through old internal emails. It was just routine work, nothing unusual, until he saw the folder. Confidential. Internal transactions. Chris frowned. Titan Holdings had been under scrutiny for months, ever since Elena Carter took over. People suspected that Jonathan Crane had been running illegal deals before his downfall. But no one could prove it. Until now. Chris hesitated. His heart pounded. If what he was looking at was real, it meant Jonathan Crane hadn't just been a cruel leader. He had been committing corporate fraud on a massive scale. Chapter 3. The Crossroads. Chris stared at the screen. His hands felt cold. His mouth was dry. This wasn't just some mistake. This was proof. And whoever had this proof became the biggest threat to Jonathan Crane. Chris had 2 choices: stay silent, delete the files, pretend he never saw them, send them to someone who could take action. But who? If he went to the wrong person, he could end up fired, or worse. His hands hovered over the keyboard. And then, his screen flickered. The email file suddenly vanished, and a message popped up. Access restricted. File deleted. Chris's stomach dropped. Someone knew, and someone was watching him. Chapter 4. The Trap Closes. The next morning, Chris walked into work, and everything felt wrong. People were whispering. Some employees avoided his gaze. Security guards kept looking in his direction. And then, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Stairwell. 5 minutes. Chris felt sick. Was it a setup? Was it a warning? Or was it something else? He hesitated, but then his instincts took over. He had to know. Chapter 5. The Unexpected Ally. The stairwell was empty, or so he thought. Then, a voice from the shadows. You found something you shouldn't have. Chris spun around. Elena Carter stood at the top of the stairs. Her expression was calm, controlled, but her eyes? Sharp. Chris's heart pounded. She knew. You deleted the files, he said. Elena took a slow step forward. No, she said. Jonathan did. Chris froze. Jonathan still had access to the company's servers? Elena nodded. He has people on the inside, people who want him back in power. Chris swallowed hard. Then he knows I saw them. A beat of silence, and then Elena said the words he feared the most. And that means you're in danger. Chapter 6. The Betrayal. Chris felt lightheaded. He had been careful, but Jonathan was always 2 steps ahead. And then, his phone rang. Unknown number. Chris hesitated, then answered. A voice he never wanted to hear again spoke. "You should have kept your mouth shut, Foster." Chris's blood turned to ice. Jonathan sounded amused, like he was enjoying this. "You think Elena can save you?" Jonathan chuckled. "She can't even save herself." Then, the line went dead. Chris stared at his phone. And then he heard the sirens. Titan Holdings was surrounded by police. Chapter 7. The Final Move. The company erupted in chaos. Security officers rushed inside. And then, the announcement played over the speakers. "Titan Holdings is under federal investigation. Do not leave the premises." Chris's breath hitched. This was it. This was Jonathan's final move. Frame Elena. Destroy her. And then, walk back into power like a hero. Chris turned to Elena. "We have to stop him," he said. Elena met his gaze. "We will," she said. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a USB drive. Chris's eyes widened. She still had the files. Jonathan hadn't deleted everything. And now, they were going to use them. Chapter 8. Justice Delivered. An hour later, Jonathan Crane was led out of his office in handcuffs. The police had everything. The hidden accounts, the fraudulent transactions, the bribes he had paid to plant evidence against Elena. And the final piece? A recorded call between Jonathan and his inside men. Jonathan. "Elena Carter will go down. I don't care how you do it. Just get it done." The moment the recording played in the courtroom, Jonathan's fate was sealed. Game over. The real victory. Chris Foster had never been a fighter. But in the end, he made the right choice. Titan Holdings was saved. Elena Carter remained CEO. And Jonathan Crane? Gone forever. But most importantly, Chris learned that one voice, his voice, was enough to change everything. "Would you have spoken up?" Chris almost stayed silent, but he didn't. "Now let's ask you, would you have risked everything to expose the truth? Drop a comment below to show your support for Chris. Like this video if you believe courage always wins. Subscribe for more powerful stories about justice and integrity. Share this video to spread the message, because silence only helps the guilty. Because in the end, one voice can change the world. Against all odds, the last stand for justice. What would you do if the world turned against you, but you knew the truth? It's easy to be strong when everyone believes in you. But what happens when you're alone? When they call you a liar? When they try to erase you? When the system itself tries to crush you? Would you give up? Or would you stand your ground? If you believe in fighting for what's right, no matter the odds, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories about courage and justice. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The world turns against her. Elena Carter had lost everything. Titan Holdings was no longer hers. Jonathan Crane had stolen it back. He had used lies, manipulation, and corruption to destroy her reputation. The headlines screamed, "Ex-CEO caught in corruption scandal." Elena Carter faces lawsuit for fraud. Titan Holdings restores rightful leader Jonathan Crane. She was painted as a villain. Her friends? Gone. Her allies? Silent. And now? She had two choices. Disappear forever. Fight like hell. And Elena? She wasn't done yet. Chapter 2. A plan to take it all back. Elena sat alone in a small, dimly lit apartment. She had no money, no resources, no legal team, But she still had one thing left. The truth. Somewhere in Titan Holdings' systems were files that proved everything. That Jonathan had lied. That he had committed fraud. That he had bought off the board. But she needed access. She needed proof. And for that, she needed help. Chapter 3. The Last Ally. Elena had one name left on her contact list. Chris Foster. The one man who had risked everything before. Would he help her again? She called. No answer. She called again. Voicemail. Her heart sank. Maybe he was scared. Maybe he had given up. Then, her phone buzzed. A single text message. Meet me. Midnight, same place. Elena closed her eyes, exhaling. Chris was still in the fight. And together, they were going to take Jonathan down. Chapter 4. Breaking in Titan. Holdings was locked down. Security was tight. Jonathan knew Elena would try something, but he wasn't prepared for her. Chris had secured temporary access to the company's archives. It would only last 1 hour. If they failed, there would be no second chance. Elena's hands shook as she logged into the system. This was it. The files were deep inside encrypted servers. She started digging. 20 minutes left. Chris kept watch, his breath shallow. Nervous. Then, alert. Unauthorized access detected. Chris's stomach dropped. They're onto us, he whispered. Elena's fingers flew across the keyboard. She had to move faster. She had to find it now. 15 minutes left. Chapter 5. The evidence that changes everything. Then, she found it. Hidden transaction files, offshore accounts. Jonathan had been funneling millions into secret bank accounts. The board was bought off. The lawsuits against Elena? Fake. She had proof. Real, undeniable proof. But footsteps outside the door. Chris froze. Elena, he whispered. We have to go. Elena's heart pounded. She uploaded everything to a flash drive. 10 minutes left. The footsteps got closer. Security guards. Jonathan's men. Chris looked at Elena. We run, now! Elena didn't move. She turned to the live security cameras. Then, she did something insane. She uploaded the files directly to Titan Holdings' employee network. Within seconds, every computer in the company flashed with a notification. Urgent! Whistleblower evidence exposed. The truth about Jonathan Crane. Then she grabbed the flash drive and ran. Alarms blared. Security rushed into the room. Chris grabbed Elena's hand, and they disappeared into the night. Chapter 6. The Fall of a Tyrant. The next morning, everything changed. The media exploded. Elena Carter exposes corporate corruption. Leaked documents confirm Jonathan Crane's crimes. FBI raids Titan Holdings headquarters. And then, Jonathan Crane was arrested. Live, on camera, handcuffed, dragged from his office. His game was over. And this time, there was no way back. Chapter 7. The Real Victory. Elena stood in front of the Titan Holdings building, watching the chaos unfold. Chris stood beside her. He let out a slow breath. I can't believe we did it, Elena smiled. We didn't just do it, she said. We won. And the best part? Titan Holdings would never belong to a tyrant again. Would you have fought back? Elena was pushed to her breaking point. She was lied about, betrayed, hunted. But she never gave up. Now, let's ask you, would you have fought back against Jonathan? Drop a comment below to show your support for Elena. Like this video if you believe truth always wins. Subscribe for more stories about justice and courage. Share this video to spread the message, because silence only helps the guilty. Because in the end, the truth always rises. The final stand. Justice, redemption, and the future. What happens when the war is finally over? Some battles are fought in courtrooms. Some battles are fought in boardrooms. But the hardest battles? They are fought within ourselves. Elena Carter had won. She had exposed Jonathan Crane. She had taken back her name. She had freed Titan Holdings from corruption. But now came the hardest part. What happens after the fight is over? If you believe that truth and justice must always prevail, hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories about courage and redemption. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. The End of an Era. Jonathan Crane was gone. His arrest was all over the news. The footage played on every screen in the city. Him being dragged away in handcuffs, his face pale with shock. His empire of fear? His network of lies? All crumbled to dust. Titan Holdings was finally free. But Elena wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because winning a battle is one thing. Winning the war is another. Chapter 2. Picking up the pieces. Inside the Titan. Holdings headquarters, the air was heavy. Employees whispered in the halls. Some were relieved. Some were confused. And some were angry. Not everyone believed Jonathan was a monster. Not everyone trusted Elena. And now she had one last challenge. She had to rebuild the company. But how do you fix something broken for so long? How do you earn back trust? Elena stood at the front of the conference room, facing every single employee. And she spoke the hardest words of all. "I know what you're thinking," she said. "Why should you trust me?" The room was silent. She took a deep breath. "I won't ask for blind trust," she continued. "I won't ask you to believe in me just because I'm standing here." Her eyes scanned the room. "But I will ask you to believe in something bigger than me, something bigger than all of us. The truth." Chris Foster, standing at the back, nodded slowly, because he knew. This wasn't just about Elena anymore. It was about everyone. Chapter 3. A New Beginning. The weeks that followed were brutal. Elena didn't just fire people. She listened. She asked questions. She fixed policies. And slowly, the culture of fear began to disappear. She created an ethics committee, led by employees, not executives. She reopened cases of wrongful termination. She met with employees one-on-one to hear their concerns. And then, she did the impossible. She gave power back to the people. She allowed employees to vote on major decisions. She made Titan Holdings a company built on truth, not fear. And for the first time in years, the company thrived. Not because of fear, but because of trust. Chapter 4. The Last Question. Months passed. Titan Holdings had become something new. Elena had done what no one thought was possible. But then came the final test. An offer. One of the largest corporations in the world wanted to buy Titan Holdings. They offered millions. They wanted Elena gone. And the board? They hesitated. "Think about it," one of them said. "You could leave, start fresh. You don't have to fight anymore." And for the first time, Elena considered it. She had fought so hard. She had sacrificed everything. Was it finally time to let go? Chapter 5. The Legacy of a Fighter. Elena stood at the top of the building, staring at the city below. Chris joined her. "You're thinking about leaving," he said. Elena didn't answer. She just let out a long breath. Chris was silent for a moment. Then he said, "If you go, what happens next?" Elena looked at him. He continued, "If you leave, who takes over? If you leave, does everything you built disappear?" Elena closed her eyes. She knew the answer. If she walked away, the company would fall apart. Someone like Jonathan would take over again. Everything she fought for would mean nothing. She turned back to Chris, determined. "I'm staying," she said. Chris smiled, because he had known all along. Elena Carter was never the type to walk away. Chapter 6. Lessons from the Battle. Titan. Holdings became a symbol of hope, a company built on truth, a reminder that one voice can change everything. But this story? It's bigger than Elena. Because the real lesson is for all of us. When you see injustice, speak up. When you feel fear, push forward. When you are knocked down, get back up. Because the world doesn't change on its own. It changes when people fight for it. What would you have done? Elena Carter didn't just win a battle. She proved that the strongest people are the ones who refuse to stay silent. Now, let's ask you, would you have kept fighting even when the world told you to give up? Drop a comment below to show your support for Elena's journey. Like this video if you believe truth and justice always win. Subscribe for more stories about courage, resilience, and victory. Share this video to spread the message, because the world needs more fighters, because in the end, justice belongs to those who refuse to stay silent.